covering passage 1, questions 1 through 7. This is a conflicts passage, and we know it's conflicts because we see scientist 1, scientist 2, scientist 3. And conflicts are always going to have some variation of that. They may say scientist or student or method or hypothesis. So when preparing a conflicts passage, you want to first identify the conflict, which is usually in this first paragraph. In this one, the conflict is, it says, some large rocks have moved along the surface, leaving shallow trails in the clay sediment, some up to several hundred meters long. 3 scientists provide explanations of how these rocks moved. So we're just looking at explanations of how they moved. Scientist 1 says snow melt freezes, creates mud rafts, light winds, and they move several hundred miles a day. So snow melt freezes, mud rafts, there's light winds, and they move several hundred meters a day. Scientist 2 said there is snow melt, but it does not freeze. So that's a difference from scientist 1. It's a combination of mud and algae. So mud and algae reduces friction, causing them to move. There are strong winds that cause them to move, so that's different as well. And they move several hundred meters in a few hours. So I'm looking for the differences between the conflicts. And scientist 3 says water and ice does not play a role, even though it does collect. He says there's fault lines, tectonic movement, so earthquake, seismic movement. There are strong winds, so similar in the strong winds, move few meters over several years. Question 1, according to scientist 2, friction between rocks and clay is reduced. We just read about this and annotated it. And it says it's reduced between mud and algae. The mud and algae reduces friction. So our answer will have to be choice D, mud and algae. Question number 2 is a suppose question. Anytime you see suppose if Y in a question, that's your key that you're going to have to think a bit, add some of your own reasoning to the question. So suppose a researcher observed that wind speeds greater than 80 miles per hour are needed to move the rocks. The observation is consistent with which of the scientists? So scientist 1 says only light winds are needed. So the suppose part is that the light winds are not greater than 80 miles per hour, so it cannot be scientist 1. So H is the only one that does not have scientist 1 in it. So H will be our correct answer. We have another suppose question, number 3. Suppose no seismic activity was recorded. This would weaken which of the scientists' explanations. So scientist 3 says there's located along a fault line, vertical shifts, tectonic plates. If that is seismic activity, you have to know that. So it would definitely weaken scientist 3. So our answer is B. Got another suppose question. You're going to have to think in this one, reason a bit. Suppose it were discovered that a particular rock formed a 200-meter long trail in 72 hours. Would this discovery support scientist 1's explanation? So scientist 1 says that the rocks are able to move several hundred meters in a few days. 72 hours is a few days because 24 hours is 1 day. So that is consistent with scientist 1. So yes, he indicated they can move several hundred meters in a few days. A few hours would have been the wrong choice. That's scientist 2. Sometimes you're just looking for which answer tells the truth about what is stated. So your answer is G. Suppose that during 1 year there was no measurable movement of any of the rocks. Scientists 1 and 2 would agree that was due to the lack of what, or the absence of what. So both scientists agree that snow melt is needed. Only scientist 2 says algae is needed, and only scientist 2 says strong winds are needed. Sub-zero temperatures are needed for scientist 1, so the only thing they agree upon is snow melt, so your answer has to be B. Suppose, gotta think, the air temperature in the playa varies between 4 degrees and 47 degrees. Would this information support the explanation of scientist 2? So scientist 2 says snowmelt does collect, however, the temperature does not get cold enough for ice to form. So you have to have a bit of knowledge in knowing that 4 degrees is not cold enough for ice to form. Ice forms at 0 degrees Celsius. So our answer would be F, yes, but it would support scientists too because ice cannot form in that range. So F is the correct answer for number 6. Based on scientist 1's explanation, a rock trail that is 33 centimeters wide would be most likely made by a rock with approximately what width? So scientist 1 says, evidence of this lifting is seen that the trails left by rocks are both shallow and only about 2/3 as wide as the rocks themselves. So they're about 2/3 as wide. So 2/3 is 33 of what, right? So 33. So that means 1/3 would be about 16. So 2/3 is 33. So a full rock is going to be about 50. So C. So that's all the questions in this passage. In any given ACT science test, you're going to have one conflicts passage. And that passage usually has 7 questions. And if you're on track to finish the test, you want to finish it in about 6.5 minutes. And while there is not a particular order for this test, you should do this passage first if you're either a strong reader or you plan to finish the test, because there's no shortcut to this passage. You can't really go straight to the questions. You need to at least know the conflict and know the differences. Reach out if you have any questions.